Hey everybody, Jim here with your daily dose of Japanese gaming goodness. It's the import game of the day, but first I want to give a huge shout out and thank you to Sarumaru for making such an awesome intro for this series. Guys, if you love import gaming content, you need to go and check out Sarumaru's YouTube channel. I guarantee you will love it. Link is in the description. And with that being said, today's game is Ike Neketsu Hakibu for the Famicom. The easiest way to describe this game is that it takes the characters from River City Ransom and throws them into a hockey game. So just like Super Dodgeball and Nintendo World Cup, it's another fun, arcadey sports game from Technos Japan. The controls are really simple. Just pass and shoot when on offense, and when you're on defense, you have carte blanche to bash your opponents in the head with your hockey stick, kendo stick, or baseball bat, because while most traditional hockey games stick to those boring old hockey sticks, this game gives you a little bit of variety in your bludgeons. When playing through the single-player story mode, you'll play against various other teams from lots of different sports backgrounds, and after you beat them, you can start wearing their uniforms and playing with their stick of choice, hence the baseball bats and kendo sticks, and every uniform grants a bunch of different stat boosts to your team. It's an awesome single-player mode and offers quite a bit more than your typical season mode from an old NES sports game, and if you've got a few friends handy, you can enjoy some two-player competitive play, or you can team up for some four-player 2-on-2 action. The gameplay is fun and easy to pick up and play, and the graphics and sound design are every bit as good as you would expect from 8-bit Technos, i.e., they're both really awesome. If you liked other NES hockey games like Ice Hockey and Blades of Steel, and especially if you're already a fan of Technos Japan's other games, then you definitely love this Japan-exclusive gem. It's Ike Neketsu Hakibu, and 8-bit sports games don't get much better than this. Hey everybody, Jim here with your daily dose of Japanese gaming goodness. It is the import game of the day, and today's game is Konami Y World for the Famicom. This is the perfect game for fans of Konami's classic 8-bit properties because it basically takes all of them, throws them into a blender, and what comes out is an open-ended action platformer that washes over you like a wave of nostalgic bliss. You start the game with Konami Man and Konami Woman and are tasked with going to various locations taken from a ton of different Konami games to find and rescue that game's main character, and after you've saved them, they become a member of your team, so you'll be swapping back and forth between characters like Simon Belmont, Goemon, and Mikey from the Goonies as you explore levels, find hidden items, defeat bosses, and unlock more characters. It is a little tricky since some areas require certain characters' unique abilities to navigate through them, so there's a bit of trial and error at play, but it's very fun, and it's a real treat just to be able to play as so many characters and explore so many stages that are recognizable from their respective games. You even get a break from the platforming stages to play a little bit of Twinbee and Life Force, which is awesome. Plus, the graphics in Y World do a great job of representing so many different visual styles from so many different games. You get stages and enemies from every game included, and they look just like you'd want them to, and the soundtrack is a no-brainer. It's absolutely amazing. Every time you switch from one character to another, that character's theme plays, so you get signature songs from all of the Konami games included, which means it's 100% great music. Again, if you love classic Konami, then you'll definitely love Konami Y World. It's pure nostalgic awesomeness in cartridge form. Hey everybody, Jim here with your daily dose of Japanese gaming goodness. It is the import game of the day, and today's game is Urusei Yatsura, Lum's Wedding Bell for the Famicom. This is a game obviously based on the classic 80s manga by Rumiko Takahashi, and as the title implies, the object of the game is to get main character Lum to her wedding ceremony with would-be husband Ataru. The way you do this is by going up floor by floor of various schools ranging from preschool to high school, avoiding all kinds of enemies including octopi, men in black, and a giant fat cat while collecting power-ups and using a series of escalators and trampolines to make your way up to the roof where a UFO is waiting to whisk you away to the next level, and the entire time you're racing against the clock as floor after floor is consumed by a giant fire. Why are all of these schools on fire? Who cares? It's a video game. Honestly, this is not a great game by any stretch of the imagination. It's very often frustrating and it controls fairly stiffly, but for me, it has the appeal of a classic arcade game. Sure, the graphics are very primitive, and the soundtrack is just a couple of repetitive tracks repeating over and over again, and the entire point of the game really is just to get a high score, but those things actually make it enjoyable for me. Sometimes I just want to play a simple 8-bit game that'll piss me off until I finally give up and play something else. At the very least, this game is fun enough that I often find myself saying, just one more try, let's get to that damn wedding. Plus, just the fact that it's an obscure little game based on an anime series that I happen to like just adds to its charm. It's Urusei Yatsura Lum's Wedding Bell for those of us who like our space aliens in tiger print bikinis. Hey everybody, Jim here with your daily dose of Japanese gaming goodness. It is the import game of the day, and today's game is Y World 2 for the Famicom. This game was originally released in 1991 and later on the Wii Virtual Console, but again, only in Japan, which is a real bummer for fans of Konami's 80s properties, because the Y World games are essentially a love letter to the Konami games of that era. It gives you a bunch of classic characters to choose from, and every stage is taken from a different Konami game and given a bit of a cutesy, Twinbee-esque makeover. You'll start out playing as Rickle, the game's main protagonist, but by collecting power-ups, you can swap back and forth between various characters like Simon Belmont, Goemon, and Bill from the Contra series. Each character has different attacks and abilities that makes them useful in different areas, but my personal favorite is definitely Bill. His multi-directional attack is perfect for flying enemies and for most of the game's bosses. Plus, there are a couple of shooting stages modeled after Twinbee and Gradius respectively thrown in for good measure, as well as stages that are very reminiscent of games like Bump and Jump and Frogger. It's a very fun game regardless of which gameplay style it goes for. The platforming is solid, there are lots of different enemies and bosses all taken from their respective games, and having the option of playing as all of those different characters is very enjoyable for a Konami fan indeed. The only downside really is that this is a pretty easy game and can be finished in about an hour, but other than that, it's great. The icing on the cake, and it's a lot of icing, is the great visuals and all of the references to classic Konami games. 1 minute you're playing some Twinbee, and the next you're fighting your way through Dracula's castle, all while listening to an amazing soundtrack that features remixes of some of the best songs in Konami's library. Are you a big fan of 80s Konami in all its 8-bit glory? Then Y World 2 is the game for you. Hey everybody, Jim here with your daily dose of Japanese gaming goodness. It is the import game of the day, and today's game is Mad City for the Famicom. This game, in a nutshell, is the Famicom version of Bayou Billy on the NES, and while that's a game that has something of a bad reputation for being way too difficult to the point of being almost unplayable, I have to admit that I've never actually played Bayou Billy, but I do love Mad City, and I think if you're someone who played and hated Bayou Billy, this game might just change your mind. It's a far more forgiving game in every way possible. For instance, in the beat-em-up stages, enemies deal less damage and take fewer attacks to defeat, so it's not nearly as frustrating. In the shooting stages, you're started with more ammo, and again you take less damage from enemies, and in the driving stages, Your Jeep can absorb multiple hits, and the road is significantly wider, making these stages much easier to get through. With all that being said, it doesn't mean that this is an easy game. Far from it, it's still very challenging, but it doesn't feel totally unfair. It'll give you a tough playthrough, but it won't drive you crazy with frustration. And aside from how challenging it is or isn't, this is a really fun game. I like NES games that include a variety of gameplay styles like Golgo 13 and Vice Project Doom. The beat-em-up stages are fun, and you get plenty of weapons like guns and whips to play with, and the driving and shooting stages are very fun breaks in the beat-em-up action, plus the graphics and sound in Mad City are both awesome. It's 8-bit Konami though, so that's pretty much to be expected. You get a variety of stages set in and around New Orleans that all look cool, and the soundtrack has a poppy, upbeat sound to it that I like a lot. Top to bottom, this is a great game. Didn't care for Bayou Billy? Take the Famicom challenge. Give Mad City a try. Hey everybody, Jim here with your daily dose of Japanese gaming goodness. It is the import game of the day, and today's game is Kaiketsu Yanshamaru 2 Katakuri Land for the Famicom. This is a 1991 release that was developed and published by IRIM, and it's the sequel to what was released in North America as Kid Nicky Radical Ninja, which itself was a port of the original Yanshamaru arcade game, and while the original does leave a lot to be desired, I think this game is a huge improvement over its predecessor. This is a pretty straightforward action platformer, and it's a pretty damn good one too. You're given an overworld map of the titular Katakuri Land and allowed to play the various stages in whatever order you like, and there's not really much of a gimmick to the gameplay here. Just jump across platforms and dispatch enemies until you reach the end of a stage and face off with a boss. You're given a handful of power-ups to help you along your way, like energy blasts, temporary energy shields, and you also have the ability to transform into a few different animals, but that very rarely feels necessary. I actually forgot I could even do it, aside from a couple of sections. So, while it's not a mind-blowing game, this is still a pretty solid platformer. It is really easy and really short though, so keep that in mind. But if you just want to kill some time with a simple and fun 8-bit game, this one will do just fine. Plus, the graphics and sound are both fairly decent. I think IRIM is a company that sometimes doesn't get the credit it deserves for having made some amazing games, and while I wouldn't exactly call this one of their best, it's certainly nowhere near their worst. It's Kaiketsu Yanshamaru 2 Katakuri Land, a far superior sequel in every way. Check it out. Hey everybody, Jim here with your daily dose of Japanese gaming goodness. It is the import game of the day, and today's game is Parodius Da for the Famicom. This is a 1990 release developed and published by Konami, and it's the sequel to the original Parodius, which first appeared on the MSX home computer in Japan. The entire series, as the title implies, is a parody of Konami's Gradius series, and as such, has a lot in common with it, even including the Vic Viper as a playable ship, but also allows you to play as an octopus, a penguin, and Twinbee, a character taken from another classic Konami shooter series. Having these different ships doesn't just offer an aesthetic difference, but each one also has a different set of power-ups, so depending on what your favorite Konami shooter is, you'll be drawn to one ship or the other. For example, the Vic Viper is equipped with the classic Gradius string of power-ups, while the Octopus has the Salamander power-ups, Pentaro the Penguin has the power-ups from Gradius 2, and Twinbee obviously has the power-ups from the Twinbee games. Another inclusion to the gameplay that sets it apart from its Gradius cousins is the addition of the multicolored bell power-ups taken from the Twinbee series that grant all kinds of different abilities like super bombs, energy barriers, and invulnerability. So while in general this is just a parody version of Gradius, the gameplay offers you a little something from each game in the series as well as Twinbee, which makes it an especially fun playthrough regardless if you're a Konami shooter veteran or just getting your feet wet and trying out all the different ships and power-ups to see what works for you. In addition to all of that, you can expect some very colorful visuals, wacky enemy and boss designs, and a Konami 8-bit soundtrack which is sure to please. Make no mistake, Parodius Da is a parody, but it's no joke. This is a fantastic 8-bit shooter. Hey everybody, Jim here with your daily dose of Japanese gaming goodness. It is the import game of the day, and today's game is Sweet Home for the Famicom. This is a 1989 release that was developed and published by Capcom, and it's actually a movie license title that was released around the same time as the movie of the same name that was directed by famed Japanese horror writer-director Kiyoshi Kurosawa. It tells the story of a documentary crew who go to a creepy old mansion to film a story about the restoration of a long-neglected fresco painting collection when they become trapped inside with vengeful spirits and grotesque monsters. This game is essentially the precursor to the survival horror genre. In fact, Resident Evil was originally envisioned as a remake of Sweet Home, but a Famicom survival horror game obviously isn't going to have much in common with its PlayStation counterpart, but instead it plays more like a JRPG with some experimental survival horror elements. You're given 5 characters to play as that can be split into multiple parties with a maximum of 3, and each character has a special skill that makes them useful in different areas of the mansion, and they each have a limited inventory, so you'll need to use characters in tandem to progress through the mansion. There are puzzles to solve, keys and other necessary items to find, a multitude of weapons, and of course, a ton of different creatures to do combat with in a very traditional JRPG style, random battles and all. Also, when a character dies in this game, they are dead for good, and depending on how many characters make it out of the mansion alive, you're treated to multiple endings. This is a totally unique game on the Famicom. Its mix of JRPG and survival horror elements makes for a very enjoyable gameplay experience, and the music, visuals, and monster designs actually make for a surprisingly creepy 8-bit game, which is something that's quite rare. If you'd like to try the 8-bit beginnings of the survival horror genre, Sweet Home is waiting for you. Hey everybody, Jim here with your daily dose of Japanese gaming goodness. It is the import game of the day, and today's game is Ninja Ryukenden 3 for the Famicom. This is a 1991 release that was developed and published by Tecmo, and it's also known as Ninja Gaiden 3: The Ancient Ship of Doom in North America, so it's not a Japan exclusive game, but the differences are significant enough that I just couldn't overlook this one. It features a plot set between the first and second games, and it once again centers around Ryu Hayabusa, who apparently has a clone running around somewhere wreaking havoc in service of a shadow organization that's creating bioweapons and possesses a flying fortress that can threaten the entire world, so Ryu definitely has his work cut out for him. If you've played any of the games in this trilogy, then you know exactly what to expect. Challenging, high-intensity, and fun action platforming. This game ditches the Shadow Ninja power-ups from the second installment and introduces a new sword power-up that increases both the range and power of your sword, kind of similar to Strider Hiryu, and this, I think, was a great inclusion. Also, you can now hang from ledges, which was a feature included in the Master System version of the original Ninja Gaiden, and the major difference between this and the NES version is in the difficulty. In this version, you take less damage from enemies, and you have infinite continues and a password system, both of which were removed for the NES release. So while this is by no means an easy game, it's much less frustrating than its NES counterpart, and it's actually my favorite game in the trilogy as a result. The gameplay is amazing, the graphics are really good, including more of those classic anime-style cutscenes to move the story along, and as usual, the soundtrack is fantastic. Definitely, if you weren't satisfied with Ninja Gaiden 3, then give Ninja Ryukenden 3 on the Famicom a shot. You'll be glad you did. Hey everybody, Jim here with your daily dose of Japanese gaming goodness. It is the import game of the day, and today's game is Nekketsu Street Basket Ganbare Dunk Heroes for the Famicom. This is a 1993 release that was developed and published by Technos Japan, and it's just one in a long line of games that comprise the Kunio-kun series, so in case you couldn't recognize it from the character designs, this game fits right in with River City Ransom and Super Dodgeball, with a plot that features Kunio winning a trip to America, where he and his friends go on a tour of a handful of locations like New York and Las Vegas, taking on the best street basketball players in the country. The best way to describe this game is that it's a 2-on-2 combat basketball game of sorts where there are no rules to speak of. You can beat your opponents into oblivion with your bare fists, or whatever you can find lying around the court. There's no out of bounds, so feel free to jump off of objects in the background, or incorporate a ladder into the game for some Harlem Globetrotters style hijinks. There are also multiple hoops on each side of the court, and the higher up the goal is, the more points it's worth, and if you can sink a shot into multiple goals at once, you can rack up some big points, so it's kind of like old school MTV Rock and Jock basketball games. And if that wasn't enough, you can actually steal a goal from your opponent's side to add to yours for the chance to score even more points. It's an absolute frantic mess of a game, and I absolutely love it. The action never lets up, and it's insanely fun. You can even hook up a multi-tap for some 4-player action, which I've yet to try, but I can only imagine how nuts this game gets with 4 people playing. And as with any game in the series, the graphics are great, the character designs are classic, and the soundtrack is outstanding. It's Nekketsu Street Basket Ganbare Dunk Heroes, and it's one of my absolute favorite 8-bit sports games. It's awesome.